And we're back with another edition of Gaming Bugbears, this time Dungeon Crawls. Now, following on from my recent reading of D&D Next, there's a video on my channel. I'll put a link down there in the description of the video. I suggested running a short playtest game for my regular group, probably about 5 weeks. Now, my wife Hannah, who's probably a bigger D&D fan than me, said, well, you best make sure it's got some Dungeons and Dragons in it then. And this got us talking about one of the elements of the game that I often find very unappealing in D&D, and that is the dungeon crawl. My problem with dungeon crawls is that a lot of them are ill-conceived, fairly random affairs with little coherence. Now, to me, random jumble of rooms containing a scattering of equally random monsters, just standing around dumbly waiting to be killed or guarding odd bits of treasure, isn't really a role-playing game. It's something more akin to the old Hero Quest games from Milton and Bradley, licensed from Games Workshop back in the days when you can buy Games Workshop stuff without having to take out multiple mortgages. Yes, I am old enough to remember those days. However, as Hannah rightly pointed out, dungeons don't have to be like that. They can be used to good effect with a little forethought. So, I thought rather than just ranting on as I've been doing so far, I'd share my own rules for making a decent dungeon crawl. Rule number 1. Don't use more rules and rooms than you have to. Anybody got time for wandering through some ridiculously large dungeon that's got no reason for being so big? Most cellars, houses and other buildings that could legitimately become dungeons aren't that big. They've got no reason to be. Rule number 2. Don't have multiple levels where the players level up and the monsters get progressively harder as you go up level by level. That sort of shit is fine in computer games, but it just feels artificial and fake in tabletop RPGs, so why bother doing it? Rule 3. Think about your dungeon's reason for existing first, then map it out and populate it accordingly. Don't just throw in monsters and treasure randomly. The players will realise and will start to lose interest. Rule number 4. Don't use random traps. They're really annoying and they're mostly only there to give the rogue something to do. If you must use traps, at least make them logical and have some purpose. Otherwise, the rogue has a plethora of other skills that they can use besides just looking for traps. How about busting some of them out instead? Rule number 5. Think about how the monsters in your dungeon survive and how they live day to day. Don't just drop them in randomly. Give the ecosystem of your dungeon some sort of coherence, and this will make it seem altogether more plausible. Rule 6. Try and give your players a sense that they've wandered into a living environment, and not just some pointless labyrinth where monsters wander dumbly about waiting their inevitable death at the hands of a bloodthirsty party of player characters. And that's all the rules I have really for dungeon crawling. If you have any thoughts on dungeon crawls, maybe you like them, maybe you don't. Maybe you've got suggestions for improving them. Perhaps you've got some questions. Post them in the comments below. I look forward to reading what you've got to say.